Hello and welcome to the Space Between Ideas. I'm Blaine Gates. Welcome to 100 Task. No, actually, we're still talking about the book Create Crucial Insight, and we are specifically talking about the state purposes checklist. How did we get here? We came here because originally we were talking about motivation, and we were talking about personality types. Specifically, we were talking about the big 5 personality traits. And in the last couple of videos, I was thinking about these personality traits, and specifically like what traits would be useful for me as a CEO. And it seems as though you have to have some openness and perhaps enough openness. The question is, can you ever have too much openness? And the answer is no, not exactly, but you should have enough openness for the job. And so if your job is to write movies, books, if your job is to open up the universe using math or physics, if your job is to imagine new toys for children, if your job is something which requires a crazy, wild-eyed scientist, if you want to go back into the future, then likely you will need a huge amount of openness. But as you can see, if we compare, like sometimes I use this example of Steve Wozniak and the guy, what's his name? Jobs. What's his name? Steve Jobs. And my argument is that Steve Wozniak is much, much higher in openness. And Steve Jobs, although he's high in openness, he's also really high in conscientiousness, which makes him the innovator. So Steve Wozniak is like, boom, he gives you this gigantic map of all of these different ideas. But the issue is like he's good at seeing the things and expressing the things and showing everyone all of these things. But then like, how do you actually go in there and take out the most important elements, order them, put them into a package, and then sell that package? That is likely something that you would need a lot of conscientiousness to do. From there, we walked into the thing called Fogg's motivation model, and we learned that some people are naturally motivated to do certain things, and other people are naturally motivated to do other things. We can generally categorize them into people that are interested in people who are interested in things, and you might also categorize them as people who are interested more in like things, more like scientific or material. And then other things, maybe if you're interested in people, likely you are interested more in emotion. But then I also highlighted this element of something like spiritual. Maybe you're interested in something like spiritual. And we have like the spirituals on one side and then the sciences on the other side. And no doubt that we have emotion in the middle. There's no doubt that we all have emotion, but there is some doubt from the angle of the scientist about spirituality. And then, well, I don't know, do spiritual people have some doubt about science? I don't know. I try to break it down into smaller and smaller pieces and less concrete ideas. And over the last couple of days, I've been thinking about this idea, like, is it just like a battery? Are we just batteries? So there's things that I can do which increase my positive energy. So we have like positive neutrons, or I don't know, are they called neutrons? And we have positive states, we have negative states. So for example, if I'm an extrovert, then I get my energy from other people. So when I spend time with people, it energizes me. If I'm more introverted, then actually I need to use energy. So actually I have to have a reserve of energy in order to be in these types of emotional situations with other people. Perhaps something like coding. So maybe I don't really like coding. I have to have a huge amount of energy in order to go and start doing coding. But then other people, like when they are coding, it actually gives them energy. I love doing this thing. I have the intrinsic motivation. I don't need a spark trigger, meaning I don't have to have a reserve of energy, and I don't have to have the stimulus, the spark of like some other benefit that I will get if I do this work. So can we just think of everything as just two poles? We have positive charges, we have negative charges, and that's it? And then we have a neutral state. I don't know. So in the last video, we were talking about maintaining or enhancing wellness. And the whole idea behind this, when it actually comes back into the work world, is that we have to codify these ideas within an employment contract. And it got me thinking about the state. So when you are born into a country, then you have laws of the land. And the laws dictate what you can do, what you can't do, and it also incentivizes certain types of behavior. And so in general, like how much of what we do is already told us, like dictated by law. Like you have to go to school. You have to give your children medical attention when they need it. There's like all these different things that you have to do. You have to get a license if you want to drive. And so I don't know. I don't know how to think about this. But at least in a business, I think that every organization is a type of government. The government of a country is quite a complex government that has different levels. It has the federal level, the provincial level, the civic level, and they have different roles and responsibilities in order to provide essential services to its citizens. A company is also a type of organization, and you could also say it's a type of government. Do companies have laws? Well, they certainly have an article of association, and perhaps in the articles of association, they may have certain types of things stipulated there, which says the powers of certain people within the organization to do certain things. And that's also what, like a constitution also does. But something that's different from a government and a company is that a person is joining a company by their own fruition. They have decided that they want to work for an organization. The organization has decided that they want to employ that individual. And at that point, the two parties have to draw up an employment contract. And although labor contract law will stipulate what are the things that should be in a labor contract, things that should not be in a labor contract, and also like things that you might add to your labor contract that are actually against the law. For example, maybe you have some kind of non-compete clause and you're like, well, I want to compete with my company. And then the company says, well, you can't compete because look, in your contract, it says you can't compete. But then you look into the labor contract law, and depending on the country, maybe it says that the company will have to continue to give you some kind of compensation in order for that non-compete clause to remain valid. And your company stops giving you that compensation. Now I can compete. So you can't have a stipulation in a labor contract which goes against the laws of the land. Anyways, all of that talking, just to get back to the point of maintaining or enhancing wellness. And in the last video, we talked about, I don't know, like 5 or 6, 7 different types of wellness that people are generally interested in pursuing. And the question is, how do you codify that within a labor contract? You see, if you'd like a certain type of behavior in your country, then you have to incentivize that behavior. Because nowadays, people, they're not the same as like my great-grandfather. So my great-grandfather, he traveled from Montana to Alberta. And at that time, there was some conflict between the government and the Indians. And the government was telling people that if they would homestead the land, meaning that if they would build a house and start to produce food on that land, then they could have a title to that land. And I'm sure that there's a history behind how different parties felt about that behavior at that time. And now I know that there are different opinions about the behavior that happened at that time. And there are some reconciliation activities that the Canadian government, perhaps the Alberta government, are undergoing because they want to find some kind of middle path to acknowledge the behavior from the past and also acknowledge that that is in the past, and now we have to find a solution for today. Anyways, my great-grandfather, he was able to get the deed to the land. Then my grandfather was a farmer. He had 60 head of cattle. He had a milk farm. He had land. He grew crops. He had 8 children. And that's where my mother was born. So I was born in Alberta. I popped up on the prairies of southern Alberta next to the Rocky Mountains. What am I talking about? So when we talk about maintaining and enhancing wellness, and specifically when we talk about a labor contract, then we want to build incentives. Oh yeah, incentives. So at the time, the government had this incentive. They said, if you homestead and if you build a house and if you plant crops and if you work the land, then we will give you a deed to the land. So of course, all of these people, my great-grandfather, my great-grandfather was born in England, and then he traveled to Utah, and then as he grew up, then he saw like a wagon pulling a bunch of kids, and his mother gave him, when he was a baby, to her brother, and her husband disappeared. Or no, it's the other way around. So his mother actually disappeared, and his father found him. My great-great-grandfather found my great-grandfather in their home in England with a handful of coins. And that was it. And so my great-great-grandfather was unable to take care of his son, and he gave his son to his sister. And his sister took that child to Utah because they heard that there was an opportunity for work, there was an opportunity to be part of a community. And then eventually my grandfather, as he grew up, at some point, he saw this wagon full of children. He followed them. He became a sheep herder. Eventually, he fell in love with a girl who was part of the family that were herding sheep. They decided to move up to Montana, and he went with them. After they got married, my grandmother was born. I'm telling my grandmother's story. My grandmother was born in Montana, and then she eventually moved to Alberta. My grandfather, I'll have to go and read that history. I read it once, but I forgot about it. Anyways, when we talk about incentives, if we talk about a labor contract, and if we talk about maintain or enhance wellness, then what about all those 6, 7 different types of wellness? All right, so if financial wellness is important to you, then it means that in the labor contract, there should be some kind of incentive that will enhance your financial wellness. And I almost feel like it should be like choose your own adventure. If you have a labor contract, let's say that we have a labor contract and it says you can choose from the following incentives. Do you want A, a gym pass, B, access to Whole Food, C, work from home 50% of the time, D, 1 day off a week, or maybe your religion, like if you're a member of the Muslim faith, perhaps you want Friday as your day off. E, and you can go through all these different types of wellness, and you can attach benefits, incentives to those different types of wellness. And then based on what people select, then you know what's going to motivate them. And then perhaps after 6 months or after a year, then they can have the opportunity to change what they thought was most important. Perhaps a woman who doesn't have a child and she's working for a company, 1 year she thinks that going to the gym is really important to her. And then maybe the next year, suddenly she has a child and her maternity leave finishes, and then she comes back to work, and now she needs to get off of work at a certain time of day. Or maybe she wants childcare, or maybe she wants some other incentive. And so if employers are more aware of the types of things that are important to people, how people want to remain well, how people want to maintain and enhance their wellness, and then they provide certain types of incentives, then people will be able to have more sparks. So if we go back to the Fogg's motivation model, those are sparks, because that's not actually the work, but they are more willing to do the work, and they're happier doing that work because the employment contract gives a provision that would enable a person to maintain or enhance wellness. So that's definitely the end of maintain and enhance wellness. Next time we were going to talk about attain certification and other recognition. Blaine Gates, Space Between Ideas. We'll see you next time.